Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
And Tropical Storm Dawn continues to churn in the Atlantic while a new area is now being highlighted for possible tropical development by the National Hurricane Center. We're talking about that and a brand new tool that we have to forecast hurricanes today on Tracking the Tropics. I am your host, meteorologist Amanda Hawley here in the hurricane headquarters, and today I am joined by our guest meteorologist, Mike Masco from Philadelphia. Thanks for joining me, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. Good afternoon.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the tropics have been kind of up and down this year, right? We've had a couple of named storms. We've been going back and forth with the water temperatures, with El Nino, but generally we've been tracking something here and there all season long.
Yeah, and look, I honestly think this is going to continue, where we're going to see these quick spin-ups, and we're in an El Nino year that's very different when you think about it than last year, which was a La Nina year. So I think we're going to get these quick spin-ups, and I think every time you get some kind of a trough split in the Atlantic, you're going to get some kind of a circulation. It's tremendous warm water across the entire Atlantic basin. So I think we easily run through this alphabet, but it is going to be an interesting year. I think it's going to be some surprise stuff, and maybe a little too close to home.
Yeah, but luckily right now, nothing is close to home. We do have Tropical Storm Dawn that we are continuing to track in the Atlantic at the moment. We will get to that here. So a good thing, though, again, is that it's actually no threat to land. It's actually doing a little bit of a loop-de-loop. Currently in the central northern Atlantic, it was subtropical. It was downgraded. Now it's a full tropical system. It's got maximum winds of 40 miles per hour. It's moving west-southwest currently at 5 miles per hour, but it's going to kind of loop back around, again, not impacting the United States or really any areas of land. So hopefully all of our storms actually stay like this season in the Atlantic. Wanted to give you a look at Tropical Storm Calvin in the Pacific. So we're actually zoomed into Hawaii right now. There were tropical storm watches and warnings in effect for the Big Island here because this tropical system is so close. So not something we typically talk about here on Tracking the Tropics in areas in the Pacific, but it was actually close to Hawaii. So I wanted to give you an idea of where that was headed. It will be continuing to move away from the island now, staying a tropical storm, though, pretty close to the islands, and then dissipating as we get toward the end of the week. But another thing that we're going to be talking about here today on Tracking the Tropics is a new tool that NOAA has to forecast hurricanes. A lot of times we will talk about the forecast models, the American model, the GFS model. But this, Mike, is actually a forecast model that is specifically looking at storms when they develop. And it's been operational now only for a couple of weeks, but it's been experimental since 2019. So it's called the HAFS model, the Hurricane Analysis and Forecast System. And it should be a pretty interesting tool that we'll be able to use here over the next several months and several years. They're going to continue to improve it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great opportunity to also take a look at what we have right now in the arsenal. I believe it is expected to replace some of our short-range modeling from the Hurricane Center. But what I love about this is that we're going to start to really dive into the intensity forecasting. That's something that hasn't been tracking very well. We're getting a lot closer in terms of the cone of uncertainty, where these storms are going. But it's the question of how strong do they become? When do they become that strong? And that's stuff that we are still trying to ascertain. Ian was one of those that we were hoping that it would get to a certain level where the messaging would be on par with the forecast. It took a lot longer last year as it came out of the peninsula of Cuba, and so we have seen that where there is a gap in our intensity forecasting modeling versus reality. This is a model that's going to see the atmosphere a lot better, and we're hoping it's going to help with our accuracy skills.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see how this performs here over the next several months. Yeah. Reminder, you are watching the Tracking the Tropics. If you're just joining us, you can use the hashtags #HeyAmanda and #HeyMike in the comment section, and we're going to be taking a look at your questions and answering them here in real time. on Tracking the Tropics today. We do have our first featured comment of the day, and it does come from Crystal, and she is asking, will we have something coming this year? And of course, that is, the question. That is the question that everybody wants to know. Again, this is from Crystal on KLFY's Facebook page, and hopefully we will be able to use this new forecast model to be able to forecast something that is, possibly coming this way. I did mention we're tracking Tropical Storm Dawn at the beginning there, Mike, and then we also have another area, a tropical wave coming off the coast of Africa. National Hurricane Center is now highlighting. Now, this forecast model's not being run on that just yet. It does have to be deemed an invest, which we don't have that just yet. But that tropical wave, something to keep an eye on, Mike.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's going to get into a hostile environment, and really the entire, mid-Atlantic region is in a hostile environment. There's a lot of wind shear out there. Dry air has been once again kind of consuming the main development region. We call that the MDL, and the subtropical ridge is very, very strong across the central Atlantic as well. So these are things that will kind of, inhibit growth for these storms. But at the apex of this subtropical ridge is, of course, where you do find that tropical storm. I do think that may even try to gain some kind of slight hurricane status as it's in this very closed environment, but then it goes away. And then we watch things that come off of the African coast. So it is going to be interesting to see what can survive the trip. We saw a couple of named storms that developed, memory escapes me on those, that came across just south of Puerto Rico, and then they were shredded apart pretty quickly. And that is pretty much, par for the course when you consider Amanda, that this is an El Nino year. So whether we get these long tracking storms that come across the Atlantic, that's yet to be seen. I think we'll probably get a better idea as we get into, say, September, late August, September, which climatologically speaking is the favorable time. I really, though, think that we're going to see a lot of homegrown storms. Storms that, again, when we see trough splits, that's the, big cold fronts that come in across the eastern United States, it'll leave a little energy in the Gulf of Mexico, maybe leave a little energy to the southeast coast. That's where I think we'll see some quick spin-ups, and it could happen very fast. And that's why a new forecast model is great, because we want to be able to see that and get a better idea of what's going to happen there, and then of course get the forecast out and keep everybody safe.
Absolutely. And because if those storms can form close to home, they are going to have plenty of energy in terms of those warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Gulf Stream off the east coast of the United States, even in the Caribbean. Those warm waters will be able to feed if that storm can fester itself. Now, going back to that forecast model, being able to use it this year, I actually earlier today was able to sit down with one of the developers of this new HAFS forecast model, the Hurricane Analysis and Forecast System. I was able to ask him some questions about how it works and what we can look forward to using this model, not just this year, but in the years ahead. Wanted you guys to take a listen as well. All right. So today on Tracking the Tropics, we are joined by Andy Hazelton, a meteorologist who actually had a hand in developing this new forecast model that we have for the tropics. Andy, thank you so much for joining me today, for one.
Thank you.
And I want to know all about this forecast model, because obviously here on Tracking the Tropics, we do a lot of forecasting of the tropics, and this is going to be a new tool that we're really going to rely heavily on moving forward. So tell me a little bit about it and, how you had a hand in developing it.
Sure. So yeah, the HAFS, or the Hurricane Analysis and Forecast System, is what it stands for. It's basically NOAA's new hurricane model. It's developed by a partnership, several agencies within NOAA, the Environmental Modeling Center, EMC, Maryland, GFDL, which is another NOAA lab, and up in Princeton, New Jersey, and then our lab down in Miami, where the Hurricane Research Divisions, we've had a big hand in it as well. And so it's a lot of people working together on different aspects of the model, different model physics and testing and the data that goes into the model, and just all sorts of things like that. And we've been doing testing on it for about 4 or 5 years now. So I've been, each summer for the last several summers, I've helped do with real-time testing, basically, where it's not official yet, but we've been testing it, kind of on the hurricanes that are out there, seeing how it performs, making changes. And then, this year we've kind of got our final version that's basically what's called operational, ready to go live. And that started as of about a month ago. So now it's in the kind of official suite of of models that the Hurricane Center has to look at when they are making their forecasts.
And so tell me what makes this one different from the ones that we already have.
Sure. So it's got kind of the latest and greatest of what we call model physics, which are sort of just the approximations for the clouds and the air down near the surface, all the sorts of little things that are can be hard to know. We don't have an exact solution for mathematically, so we have to approximate it. And it's got some of the state of the art for that. And the other thing that is unique about this modeling system is that it's the engine of it, what we call the dynamical core, sort of the part that solves the math equations, is the same one that's used in the GFS, the global forecast system, which is like our global model that people are probably familiar with, at least somewhat. So that means that like changes and improvements that we make in GFS can be used in HAFS and vice versa. So it's part of this unified forecast system is what something NOAA is pushing for, where all of their models kind of use the same engine, same core, so we can improve them together. And one unique aspect of HAFS compared to the GFS and some of the other parts of GFS is we have this moving nest, which is basically an area of high resolution, 2 kilometer, it's like fine grid that follows the storm with, as it moves, and allows you to sort of simulate the eye wall, the eye, and the rain bands, all those features of a hurricane in more detail. And that's not something one of my colleagues actually here at Miami and AOML was the main developer on that, and then we've been helping him test that over the last year as well. So it's got a lot of kind of state of the art features and ways that we can continue to make it better in the future.
So you said we've been doing testing for 4 or 5 years already. What kind of data have you gathered from it? Now it's operational, but what has the testing shown in the previous years?
Yeah, so so in the real-time testing, we've seen a lot of promise, of track and intensity improvements. And what we also do typically when we build a new model or upgrade a model is we run basically a 3-year set of 3 full hurricane seasons of what's called retrospectives, where we we're going back and running like every hurricane from the last 3 years or so as if we were running it in real time. And what we found from that was that HAFS improves over the current hurricane models like HWRF by about 10 to 15% for track, and it's comparable for intensity and structure. So you're already starting to get better forecasts with a lot more room to improve. And one thing that's also really cool about this year is we're running the 2 versions of HAFS, but we also are still running the kind of 2 other existing hurricane models, HWRF and HMON. So we'll have, for this year at least, basically 4 hurricane models where we can kind of compare and contrast. And that's really nice for forecasters because it allows them to look at what are some of the possible outcomes, and what the model that makes the storm strong, what does it do? The model makes the storm weak, what is that doing? And kind of a wide variety of information at their disposal.
Now, I know one thing that we continuously try to improve upon is the intensity forecast. I did read somewhere that this has a better handle on rapid intensification. It was one of the only models to show Ian's second rapid intensification process. Have you seen that with other runs as well?
Yeah, Ian was definitely one where where our model was able to pick that up in real time. I remember I was because I was helping run our real time forecast last year while I was also involved with the research flights. And I remember I was looking at our model thinking, I really hope this doesn't end up happening with the it was basically showing a Cat 5, which ended up happening. That was what it peaked as a Cat 5, right? And so that was definitely a case where it did well. We've seen others like Dorian in 2019, which was one of our first sort of tests of the model where it did a pretty good job picking up on rapid intensification. We've still seen other cases where it missed. So that's sort of an ongoing research challenge. We still, there's a lot of things you have to get right. You have to get, the data going into the model has to be good, which is where our research flights and that aircraft information comes in. The model physics, which is something I work on. There's lots of things you have to get right because you don't want to just have every storm rapidly intensify, because we know that's not what happens in reality. But then you have to be able to pick up those cases that do, and so it's kind of a constant
fine-tuning
learning, right? But we're excited about the promise for sure.
So is this going to be something that we rely heavily on, not just this year, but in the years to come?
Yes, that's the plan, because like I said, it'll be part of the National Hurricane Center suite of models they look at. And people are probably familiar with like the spaghetti models. This will be kind of one of the spaghetti models, I guess. But the Hurricane Center, when they're making their forecast, they don't just rely on one model. They usually look at a wide range and also typically like an average, or what they call a consensus. of, they average together several of their best models to kind of get, an idea for maybe what's the most likely outcome. And that typically does well over the course of a season or, multiple seasons. So this will be part of sort of their consensus that they use. And, they can sort of look at, hopefully rapid intensification forecasts will be good and they can use it for that. But yeah, this will be part of NOAA's modeling system for years to come.
And is it going to be continuously tweaked for years to come too? How often do you make changes to that model? Is it like something that you wait for a couple of storms, it's going to run on those couple of storms, you look and see how it did and then make changes based on that? Or is it a constant just improvement with those equations?
So a little bit of both. So the operational version, that's running, the one used by the Hurricane Center, that'll stay the same throughout this year. You really like to keep it consistent for a hurricane season. But at the same time, we on the research side are constantly making changes. We're in fact right now getting ready to do some testing in real time of a version with some new model physics during this hurricane season. So that one won't be officially used by the Hurricane Center, but we'll have data available on our website and things like that. So we'll be comparing our experimental version with the operational version, and if it's better, that'll hopefully go into the next version next year.
And what are you just in general looking forward to most about this forecast model coming online and being operational for us to use and the years ahead?
Well, I think it's really exciting because, like I said, we've got a lot of room to improve the model physics. We've got ways to improve that nesting I talked about to put multiple nests together and allow the interaction between when there's multiple storms at the same time. We're working on ways to improve that. So there's just a lot of, because we're unified with the GFS, we're in this unified forecast system framework, there's just a lot of, further upgrades we can make. As computer power increases, we can, add more and more type of features. And I think it's just got promise to hopefully take us to the next level of, not just predicting those two numbers, the track and the intensity, but storm structure and, impacts. And because, we saw with Ian, impacts go well beyond just the landfall point. And so, those are the kind of things we're thinking about as we move into the future 5 or 10 years.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you want to add that you want people to know about this or what they should look for, when we're beginning to track several storms?
Yeah, I just, want to emphasize, like I said, that, certainly, and I know, forecast models are out there publicly and it's fun to look at, but obviously always just, follow the Hurricane Center because they're sort of the ones that are, they're the professionals who digest all this different info and sort of put out the most likely scenario. So, in terms of preparing and things like that, just always make sure to listen to them on that.
All right. Well, Andy Hazelton, a meteorologist with the University of Miami and NOAA. He's actually local to the Tampa Bay area as well. You fly with the hurricane hunters and you do a lot of research for us here that is very valuable for us here on Tracking the Tropics during hurricane season. So thank you so much for joining me. And I would look forward to using this model here in the near future.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yep. All right. So again, Andy Hazelton had a hand in developing that forecast model. So it was really interesting to hear kind of what went into it. You touched on it earlier, Mike, about the intensification process, right? We know that we need a better way to predict that. And hopefully this will give us, a step up in that forecast.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's 50% better than the HWRF model. I mean, I believe it's around 6 kilometers outside of the actual nest, and then inside the nest, it's like 2 kilometers. So you're going to basically hear every hiccup a hurricane has to maybe kind of compute whether that's going to get to a category 2, 3, or beyond in its initialization process. The one thing he did say that I found was interesting is it's being based off of the GFS. That's at its core. So that's really important in the sense that it will see steering currents way beyond. And again, it just takes the littlest tug of a ridge or a trough to pull these things north, south, east, and west. And that's something that I think is really going to be important to this model. Keep that in mind, though. It is relying on the GFS. So if the GFS is wrong, well, then it's going to take down this model with it. So that's probably the issue that they may have in terms of the physics. How do you separate the two, or how do you account for any kind of biases that that the GFS has going on. But look, we're 50% better than what we have out there right now, and I'm fascinated to see how this runs out in the next few seasons ahead.
Absolutely. It should be really interesting to watch. We got a comment coming in right now from Deborah Wilson on the WFLA Facebook page. It says, hashtag, hey, Andy, will the National Hurricane Center use this model and add it with all the other models, or is it a private model only? And we did talk about this within that little interview. Yes, they are going to use this within their suite of models. He said, everybody's familiar, especially here on Tracking the Tropics, with the spaghetti models, the forecast models that we all put. This is going to be another line on that plot, which is going to be really useful. Now, will we lean on this a little bit more than the others? Maybe, depending on how, it really plays out, especially if that track forecast is 10 to 15% better, and we are seeing an improvement with the intensification. So, Deborah, yes, it is going to be used by the National Hurricane Center. It's not going to be a private model. You'll be able to look at this as well. Anybody can look at those forecast models. A lot of them are free online, and this will be a public one as well. We have another featured comment coming in from Richard Behrens on WFLA. This one, a little different comment, says, hashtag, hey, Amanda, how much does the moon affect hurricanes? Because I know they bring up the high tides, which feeds a hurricane. This is a pretty interesting comment. How does the moon relate to a tropical system? Definitely, obviously affects the tides here, right, Mike? But I think it would mainly impact a tropical system when we're talking about storm surge, so nearing landfall, not necessarily when, the storm is in its development phase or in the middle of the Atlantic. But if we have a full moon and we have those higher than normal tides, or we have a king tide because of the moon phase, and you have a landfalling system, that could exacerbate the storm surge even more. So the moon itself and the tides on an everyday basis not really going to affect the development of a storm. But I think you would agree, Mike, that if we have a higher than normal tide at landfall, it's going to exacerbate that storm surge.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's really the key takeaway. It's when they come out with their storm surge forecasting, that's weighted so heavily. The National Hurricane Center weighted so heavily in terms of what the moon's doing in terms of the tidal cycles. That would just be a Hollywood movie if the moon was making hurricanes a little bit stronger. That would be a little freaky, but not the case.
Yeah, we don't need anything else to impact them, right?
Right.
So I guess going forward, Mike, what last call for questions as well, but what are you looking forward for the rest of the season, right? We've been tracking some storms. It's been a common theme here on Tracking the Tropics, the warm water temperatures, the El Nino. Which one do you think and we think is going to win out? You mentioned it early on, you thought we were going to have a more active season. What are you going to be looking forward here in August and September when we typically get to that peak?
Yeah, look, I think we get one or two that escape through the MDR, the main development region this year. My focus and concern, and I'll tell you, is really going to be right around Florida. It's going to be across the South Atlantic coastline, because we're seeing this pattern across the country right now where it's an intense ridge. We've been talking about this heat ridge, hearing it on the national news across the West Coast. Well, now the cool air is going to push towards the east, and I do think we are going to get one or two cold fronts that come down, and that could spawn something. So, as we're getting a lot of energy coming into the Gulf of Mexico, the far eastern Gulf of Mexico, keep in mind, all the water temperatures are boiling hot right now, above 90 degrees. And that is a real dangerous combination for rapid intensification. So it's not going to take too much energy or too strong of a storm. If we bundle that energy together, we certainly lay the foundation for a big storm. So I'm not looking at one of those storms coming across the entire Atlantic, long runner. So I'm looking at something that could spin up pretty quickly. And that's something I think that comes to fruition maybe as early as, say, mid-August, where the pattern really starts to be conducive for that trough development across the Southeast.
Yeah, something that, we want to be prepared for, too. We talk about that on Tracking the Tropics a lot, being prepared. And if that's the case, if we're going to see a storm that we only have, 4 days of lead time, it's going to be a short lead time if a storm forms close to home and can use those water temperatures. So bottom line, be prepared this hurricane season, because whether the storm's out in the Atlantic or close to home, we'll be tracking it, but we want you to be prepared if it does come a little closer to home.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, these, like you said, it's quick. These things could happen quick. Or another thing is they escape too. That's the best case scenario, where they kick out. So hopefully that's the case all year long.
Yes, and we do have one more question coming in from Kenneth James on the WFLA Facebook page. This one also to hashtag Hey Andy. Yeah, I wanted to ask him a lot of questions too. What is being done to improve the GFS? And that's the American forecast model that we talk about all the time. It has been terrible the last few years, says Kenneth James from that WFLA Facebook page. Well, yes, we talk a lot about the GFS. We talk a lot about the European. They both have their perks. They both have their cons. Mike, you mentioned it earlier. Sometimes there are biases with the GFS. Typically, 13 to 14, 15, 16 days out on that forecast model, you'll see a little spin up, but it's not usually anything that comes to fruition. So what is being done? Well, we have to continue to improve those equations, and they are looking at that. They continue to improve those equations, but at the end of the day, it just takes time and testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, again, great question. And obviously, I would think he's a weather buff, or I could have wrote that question. I agree with him to a certain extent. Right, but look, at this rate, and when you look at there's two models, right, at the end of the day, in terms of what gets the most popularity, it's the European and the GFS. Look, the European's not doing great. They just did a big upgrade on the European, and last time it was paintballing, warmth way too far east. The GFS has had that pretty locked on, and it's really important. Back to what we just talked about, the GFS being the core of this new forecast model. If it's not seeing the proper amount of cool air, autumn air, especially as we get later into the season, that is going to play huge into what type of development and what type of intensity we have. If it's a huge contrast where it's cooler air across the Northeast or into the Midwest, and we have that boiling water down across Florida, that is going to be the recipe for that big intensification or even storm development. So right now, believe it or not, GFS scoring a little bit better than the European, and that's why we don't hang our hat too close to just one forecast model.
On either one, yeah. We definitely have to look at both of them. We talk about that a lot here too on Tracking the Tropics. We look at all the different possibilities, and of course, we let you at home know all of the different possibilities as well. Everything that we're tracking, you guys are aware of, and that's why we love this program so much. It's interactive. You can ask questions, and it's a great platform to be able to inform. So I want to thank Mike for joining me on this episode of Tracking the Tropics. That is going to do it for us. We talked about a lot of topics a little bit. We talked about Tropical Storm Don in the Atlantic, Calvin in the Pacific. We got this new tropical wave, and most importantly, this new forecast model, which is pretty cool. And I think both Mike and I are interested to see how it does with the storms that will develop here over the next couple of months. And of course, we will be tracking every single one of them that does develop here on Tracking the Tropics. Don't forget, you can watch this episode and past episodes on trackingthetropics.tv. You can also listen to them on your favorite podcast platform, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But thank you so much for joining me, Mike. I really appreciate your expertise and joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate it.
So for Mike and myself, thanks for joining us here on Tracking the Tropics. We'll see you next time.
Find Tracking the Tropics on these platforms. And for storm updates, the latest models, and helpful resources, visit trackingthetropics.tv.